Did you know that Max Verstappen climbed the grid in Monaco thanks to a communication error at Ferrari? But what seemed like a tactical advantage could be the key to the 2025 title. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, was Hamilton's penalty fair, or did the stewards overreact? And how can Red Bull take advantage of this unexpected turn of events at one of the toughest circuits on the calendar? In this video, I explain step by step how a Ferrari radio glitch changed the course of qualifying in Monaco, and how that opens up new opportunities for Verstappen in the championship. To understand the magnitude of the impact Lewis Hamilton's penalty had on qualifying for the 2025 Monaco Grand Prix, we must first focus on how such a critical situation can arise on a circuit where every inch of track, every second of margin, can define an entire season. Monaco is not only the most iconic track in Formula One, it's also one of the most unforgiving. The Principality's narrow streets are unforgiving of mistakes, much less misunderstandings. Any slight miscalculation, whether by the driver or the pit wall, has direct consequences for the final result. And that was precisely what happened during the second qualifying session, when Max Verstappen encountered Lewis Hamilton in a blind spot on the circuit, which turned out to be a pivotal moment of the weekend. In Q2, Verstappen was on one of his most promising fast laps, pushing the RB21 to the limit, while Red Bull sought to secure a solid grid position for a Sunday where, due to the nature of the track, overtaking would be virtually impossible. As Verstappen reached the Massenet zone, one of the circuit's most technical and challenging corners, he collided with Hamilton's Ferrari, which was traveling at a much slower pace, apparently repositioning itself on the line. The most surprising thing is that it wasn't a deliberate maneuver or an individual error by the British driver. Everything pointed to a communication failure between him and his team, something that, while seemingly minor from the outside, has a huge impact on the dynamics of qualifying like Monaco. At that moment, Ferrari's radio was decisive. From the pit wall, the team informed Hamilton that Verstappen was running slower than he actually was. In other words, they gave him the green light to regroup, unaware that Max was actually on a fast lap. That misunderstanding, that misreading of the timing and track behavior, caused the Ferrari to position itself right on the line the Red Bull needed to complete its clean lap. The result was immediate. Verstappen was forced to abort the lap, losing a clear opportunity to improve his position. The stewards immediately opened an investigation into the incident, an investigation that ended with direct consequences for Sunday's grid. What's fascinating about this point in the story is that, although traffic errors in qualifying are not new in Formula One, what happened in Monaco carries special weight. On this circuit, where 90% of the race is decided on Saturday, any alteration in the starting position has a direct impact on the chances of a podium or a victory. Therefore, the three-place penalty imposed on Hamilton under Article 37.5 of the FIA sporting regulations not only affected the British driver, but completely changed the configuration of the competition. Max Verstappen, who was originally scheduled to start from 5th place, was promoted to 4th, behind the McLarens of Norris and Piastri and the Ferrari of Leclerc. And with that, the narrative of the Grand Prix took an unexpected turn, filled with tension, strategy, and a great opportunity for Red Bull. Once Lewis Hamilton's penalty was confirmed and the Monaco Grand Prix grid was reconfigured, rumors began to circulate that went far beyond simple human error. And as is often the case in Formula One, where strategic decisions often have a political and media dimension, the focus quickly shifted from the on-track action to the paddock corridors. In this environment of careful statements and calculated gestures, rumors began to circulate that not only pointed to the Ferrari wall's responsibility in Verstappen's impediment, but also raised broader questions about internal tensions within the Italian team and the potential implications of this maneuver for the relationship between rival teams. The paddock hasn't forgotten that, at this stage of the championship, any slight movement that alters the competitive balance between teams can be interpreted as a sign of something deeper. Among the most persistent rumors that emerged after qualifying, one of the most resonant is that Ferrari's communication error was not merely an operational blunder, but a symptom of a worn-out work system. There is even talk of fissures between the technical department and the strategy department, which had already been criticized for some controversial decisions at previous Grands Prix. Some sources close to Maranello claim that the pressure of competing against Red Bull and McLaren at the highest level has begun to generate internal friction, especially between those responsible for technical development and those in charge of real-time decisions during races. This pressure is further amplified at a circuit like Monaco, where any mistake becomes a global focus of attention. And in this case, the radio failure has served as a catalyst for a wave of internal criticism, which could have consequences for the team's stability in the medium term. But the rumors don't stop at Ferrari. Hamilton's penalty and the resulting benefit to Verstappen have also reignited conversations about the alleged protection the Dutch driver is receiving from certain figures within the FIA. Although there is no concrete evidence or official statements to support this theory, many suggest that the severity of the sanction reflects a pattern that favors the championship leader. These types of narratives are common when a driver dominates the championship, and any decision by the stewards becomes a source of discussion. Some sectors of the public, and even within the specialized press, have suggested that the close relationship between Red Bull and certain powerful players in the paddock could be indirectly influencing the handling of certain situations. Although these insinuations remain unconfirmed theories, their mere circulation has an effect. They erode the perception of the neutrality of the regulations and fuel tensions between teams. Another line of rumors that has gained traction in recent hours concerns Ferrari's radio management and the possibility that the team is facing technical difficulties in transmitting real-time data. Some analysts, after reviewing recordings of the session, point to a possible desynchronization between the information channels used by the engineers and the timing of that data reaching the driver. If this is confirmed, we would be facing a more serious problem than a simple misinterpretation. It would be a failure in the internal communication system, something that could compromise not only qualifying but also the execution of strategies during the race. In a sport where the margins of error are millimetric, a minimal latency can mean the difference between victory and disaster. These types of rumors, although they don't have the same media impact as political scandals or theories of favoritism, do resonate deeply in the technical community because they directly affect the team's ability to compete head-to-head with its rivals. Meanwhile, Red Bull has chosen not to enter the controversy, at least not publicly. Verstappen's attitude in subsequent interviews was diplomatic but firm. He avoided blaming Hamilton, shifted the blame onto Ferrari, and focused on the performance of his car. However, rumors within the paddock suggest that the Austrian team has taken note of this episode as a clear sign of weakness on Ferrari's part and is adjusting its approach to capitalize on these rifts. Helmut Marko, always attentive to the political details of the sport, has reportedly suggested internally that these types of mistakes by rivals can be repeated under pressure, and therefore Red Bull should remain aggressive in its strategic approach for the remainder of the season. It is no coincidence that the team is developing new configurations for street and medium-speed circuits in preparation for races where these types of incidents can recur. Since Hamilton's penalty was officially announced and Verstappen secured fourth place on the starting grid for the Monaco Grand Prix, media attention focused not only on the immediate consequences of that move, but also on the approach Red Bull would take in the face of a weekend that, up to that point, had been more challenging than expected. In theory, Monaco should be a favorable circuit for Verstappen, a driver with an outstanding ability to maximize performance on tight and technical tracks. However, the RB21's performance during free practice raised some warning signs. The lack of consistency in aerodynamic balance and the need for last-minute adjustments forced the team to make quick decisions, some of which didn't have the desired effect. In this context, Hamilton's penalty was an unexpected relief that doesn't solve all the problems, but it does significantly change the team's strategic approach to the race. In the Red Bull pit, the reactions were cautious, almost surgical. Christian Horner avoided unnecessary triumphalism and focused on highlighting the importance of maintaining focus without being swayed by external circumstances. What happened with Hamilton changes the grid, yes, but it doesn't change our mentality. You don't win here with other people's mistakes. You win with precision, strategy, and pace. And that's what we'll continue to strive for, he declared after the stewards' ruling was announced. That phrase sums up the ethos of a team that has learned not to rely on circumstantial advantages. Red Bull understands that Monaco is a place where opportunities arise, but only those who are prepared can truly take advantage of them. In that sense, Verstappen's position of fourth on the grid, although favorable, is far from ideal. And Max himself made this clear. Verstappen's statements after qualifying portrayed a mature, focused driver, aware of the nuances that can define a race in Monte Carlo. It wasn't the session we expected. The car had good pace in FP1, but then the changes didn't work. We had to back down, and although we improved in Q3, it wasn't enough to fight for pole. We're currently fourth, which isn't optimal, but anything can happen in Monaco, he explained. What's interesting about his approach is that it avoids the rhetoric of frustration and focuses on a logic of calm analysis and intelligent risk management. For Verstappen, who has already conquered Monaco before, the key isn't just qualifying pace, but also the tactical understanding of the race. He knows that a good start, a well-executed strategy, or even a neutralization can offer him the chance to climb onto the podium or even fight for the win. And that's the mentality he conveys to his team. At the same time, Red Bull has treated this event as an opportunity to further refine its internal structure, especially regarding decision-making under pressure. The team's technical experts, such as Pierre Watch, have pointed out that the RB21's inconsistent performance this weekend has been a warning sign. The combination of high downforce, unpredictable temperatures, and an asphalt that punishes any failure in tire management has forced the team to improvise more than usual. According to internal reports, the updates introduced for Monaco, mainly to the rear wing and cooling ducts, did not yield the expected results in the early sessions, creating tensions in the initial setup. However, the subsequent adjustments allowed Verstappen to get closer to the pace of Ferrari and McLaren, which keeps the expectation of a competitive race intact. At Red Bull, they understand that the car is not in its best shape, but they also know they have the most decisive driver on the grid when it comes to converting adverse situations into valuable points. This meticulous, almost surgical approach contrasts with what is perceived from other teams, where the pressure to perform generates more reactive decisions. Red Bull, on the other hand, has adopted a controlled approach, maintaining pace, avoiding mistakes, playing with strategy, and biding its time. In that sense, Verstappen's position on the grid, while not guaranteeing an early advantage, allows him to play with traffic and the potential mistakes of those ahead. Furthermore, from fourth place, he has the leeway to choose a more flexible tire strategy, which could be key if a safety car is deployed in the first half of the race. It is precisely in these types of scenarios that Verstappen has built part of his reputation, being able to read the exact moment to attack better than anyone without letting himself be overcome by anxiety. When we talk about a position change on a circuit like Monaco, it's not just about altering the starting order. It's about changing the entire strategic dynamics of a race that, due to its unique characteristics, is defined more by off-track decisions than on-track maneuvers. Verstappen's rise to fourth place, following Hamilton's penalty, isn't a simple rearrangement. It's a concrete advantage that could have far-reaching ramifications for both the outcome of the Grand Prix and the overall balance of the World Championship. If Max can capitalize on that position, even if it's just to gain a couple of points more than expected, it could make all the difference in the title fight in a season where margins are narrow, mistakes are costly, and rivals are no longer limited to Ferrari alone. Verstappen's fourth place not only brings him closer to a better position on the track, it places him in a strategic position where the possibilities of undercutting, tactical pressure, or even inheriting positions due to errors from those ahead are much more within his reach. Monaco, historically, is the quintessential setting for unexpected dramas. A bad start, a collision at the first corner, or a poorly executed pit stop can completely change the course of the race. If Leclerc, for example, makes a mistake, as has happened in previous seasons at his home race, or if one of the McLarens suffers a mechanical problem, Verstappen would be in an ideal position to reap the rewards without having to take more risks than necessary. From fourth place, the margin for executing a patient strategy without entering into unnecessary fights is much greater. In other words, Max can afford to observe, wait, and attack just when his rivals make mistakes or get caught in the traffic behind them. But there's more at stake than a good race result. If Verstappen manages to get on the podium or even win in Monaco, that result would reinforce not only his championship lead but also his position within Red Bull as an absolutely irreplaceable figure. And that, In a year where internal tensions within the team, driven by technical decisions, resource management, and rumors about the future of key staff figures, are running high, could become a powerful argument for the Dutch driver's entourage to demand greater influence over the team's strategic direction. A victory here would not only consolidate his image as the most complete driver in the paddock, but would also increase his political value within the structure, a factor of no small importance when speculation begins about negotiations ahead of the new 2026 regulations. However, if, on the other hand, Verstappen fails to advance and even loses fourth place, that would also have profound consequences. First, because it would reaffirm the notion that the RB21 is not at the expected level on street circuits, forcing Red Bull to rethink its development plan for the remainder of the season. Second, because it would allow Ferrari or McLaren, whichever team capitalizes on the points lost by Max, to creep dangerously close in the constructor standings. And third, because it would erode the image of invincibility that Verstappen has built race after race in recent years. Being a comfortable championship leader isn't the same as being under constant pressure from two rival teams, with the media questioning whether that technical hegemony has begun to crumble. Perception, in Formula One, also defines the course of a season, and a poorly managed race in Monaco can be interpreted, rightly or wrongly, as a sign of decline. And if that weren't enough, there's the psychological factor. A good performance in Monaco has enormous symbolic value. It's the most prestigious race on the calendar, the one every driver wants to win, and where individual prestige is magnified. If Verstappen manages to win, or at least finish ahead of his main direct rivals, it will strengthen his confidence for the upcoming circuits, especially those where Red Bull has historically been dominant. But if he gets stuck in traffic, loses pace, or simply can't find the space to execute his plan, the mental blow can be significant. Not because Max is mentally weak, but because in a season where every team is operating at its limit, every detail counts, and a frustrating race in Monaco can trigger doubts, forced adjustments, and even hasty decisions in the technical department. Having analyzed the immediate implications of a change in positions in Monaco, it is crucial to project how this race could influence upcoming events, not only from a competitive perspective, but also at a structural, strategic, and emotional level. Today's Formula One is no longer defined solely by what happens on a race weekend. What truly determines the course of a championship is the team's ability to anticipate trends, adapt to setbacks, and maintain consistency amidst pressure. And that is precisely the scenario Red Bull faces after this unexpected turn in the Principality. With Verstappen in an advantageous but not dominant position, and with McLaren and Ferrari clearly evolving, the near future poses several challenges that could test the solidity of the project led by Christian Horner. First and foremost, the technical aspect must be considered. Red Bull cannot rely solely on Verstappen's skill to maintain its championship lead. The RB21 has shown certain weaknesses in recent Grands Prix, especially at circuits requiring a high downforce setup such as Monaco and Singapore. While the team has introduced updates to the rear wing and cooling system, the reality is that these improvements have not yet consolidated a clear advantage over its rivals. In fact, in Monte Carlo, the McLarens were the fastest in terms of pure pace, and Ferrari demonstrated a tactical responsiveness reminiscent of its best days. If Red Bull fails to extract the RB21's full potential in the next 2 or 3 rounds, it could lose an advantage that seemed assured at the beginning of the season. The team's engineers are already working on a new setup for medium-speed tracks, such as Montreal and Barcelona, but these developments must be implemented in time and, more importantly, must work from the first free practice session. Another key aspect to monitor will be the team's internal developments. As has already been hinted in the paddock, tensions between some members of the coaching staff and management could escalate if results aren't forthcoming. Helmut Marko, known for his direct style and influence on long-term decisions, has begun pushing for structural changes in the areas of strategy and simulation. His position is clear: Red Bull can't afford to react too late to the growing threat from McLaren, nor can it afford to repeat the mistakes other teams have already paid dearly for. If Verstappen has another problematic weekend in terms of setup or tactical execution, those frictions could surface even more intensely. And that would inevitably have a direct impact on the driver's morale and his relationship with the team. In that sense, Verstappen's role will be more decisive than ever. Not only as a driver, but as a leader. He himself has repeatedly stated that he feels comfortable with the team and that his contract binds him to Red Bull beyond 2025. However, in modern Formula One, contracts are broken as easily as regulations change. If the team fails to provide him with a consistently competitive car, and if rumors of internal disorganization continue to grow, it wouldn't be unreasonable to think Verstappen might consider other options in the future, especially if teams like Mercedes or even Aston Martin come forward with solid proposals for the technical revolution that is coming in 2026. Right now, the Dutchman is the most coveted driver in the paddock, and any sign of doubt from Red Bull could trigger unexpected movements in the driver market. We also need to pay attention to how rivals will move after this Grand Prix. McLaren, with a young and solid duo like Norris and Piastri, has shown that it is ready to fight on all fronts. Their technical evolution has been one of the most consistent surprises of the year, and in terms of race management, they are showing increasing maturity. If they can hold their own on mixed configuration circuits, they could become Red Bull's main threat in the second half of the season. Ferrari, for its part, knows it must urgently correct its communication errors and refine its race strategy if it wants to stay in the fight. Hamilton's penalty was a tough blow, but also an opportunity to reset priorities within the team and strengthen its decision-making systems. In short, none of the three teams can afford to make mistakes in the upcoming races if they want to have a real chance at the final rounds of the calendar. Finally, from a broader perspective, this moment represents a turning point in the championship. What happens in the next 3 or 4 races could define not only the standings, but also the political and technical balance of Formula One heading into the new era of 2026. Teams are already making key decisions: budgets for the development of the current car, resources for next year's chassis, driver lineups, and, above all, preparation for the new engines. Red Bull has been a step ahead since the rule change in 2022, but knows that advantage can evaporate if it doesn't manage the present properly. And in that context, what Verstappen does in the upcoming Grand Prix and how the team reacts to his needs could be decisive in defining not only this championship, but also the long-term direction of the entire team.